Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Let's do it.
You know the drill. You're here for a crash course in the latest market mayhem and political pandemonium. And today is, well, let's just say it's a doozy.
Yeah, no kidding. We've got headlines screaming about Trump's return, some pretty wild market swings, and a whole bunch of economists making predictions that, well, let's just say they're not for the faint of heart.
Buckle up, folks. This is going to be a bumpy ride. So we've got our usual blend of morning news and market reports, and trust me, there's some seriously juicy stuff to unpack.
Oh yeah, we're talking unexpected market moves, big economic forecasts, and even a surprise twist in the Trump saga.
Okay, so first things first.
Yeah.
Trump, he's back in the White House, and he's not wasting any time making a splash.
Nope, not at all.
He's just announced a 10% tariff on goods from China.
Wow.
And get this, a 25% tariff on everything coming in from Mexico and Canada.
25%.
25. He's citing, concerns about drug trafficking and illegal immigration as the reasons behind it. But man, talk about shaking things up, right?
This is huge. I mean, tariffs like this, they could really disrupt global trade. Think back to those trade wars back in the early 1900s or even 1980s, right? Protectionist policies like this, they often led to retaliation. And things could escalate pretty quickly.
So we could be looking at another trade war.
It's definitely a possibility, and one that has real-world consequences, not just political posturing.
Right.
It's not just about politics. This is economics, and it affects everyone. This move by Trump, it could mean a stronger U.S. dollar, sure, but it'll likely weaken those other currencies.
I see.
And that could have a ripple effect throughout the global economy.
Speaking of ripple effects, Asian markets are already showing a mixed bag of reactions to the news.
Yeah, some indices are down, others are slightly up. It's kind of all over the place right now.
And here in the U.S., futures are dipping, oil and treasury yields are down.
It's like everyone's holding their breath, waiting to see what happens next.
So if you're listening to this and you've got investments overseas, or maybe your business relies on imports or exports, this is something you really need to pay attention to. This is serious stuff.
Absolutely.
But here's the thing that I just can't wrap my head around. Despite all this tariff drama, the U.S. markets actually went up yesterday.
Oh, yeah.
The Dow and the Russell 2000, they even hit record highs. It's almost like investors are just ignoring this potential trade war that's brewing.
Well, it's not quite that simple. Remember, the market is very much driven by sentiment. And right now, there's a lot of optimism surrounding Trump's new Treasury Secretary pick, Scott Bessent. Wall Street seems to like him. They see him as, business-friendly.
Right. So maybe they're thinking, okay, Trump might be throwing these tariffs around, but Bessent will keep things in check.
Exactly. It's like they're betting on a more moderate approach to economic policy, even with the tariffs in place. It shows how much power a single personnel decision can have on market perception.
It really does. And speaking of specific market moves, we saw NVIDIA, the chip giant, actually take a loss yesterday.
That's interesting.
Which is pretty unusual, given the overall market gains. The VIX, that volatility index, it was down.
Yeah.
And even the 10-year Treasury yield fell.
So there's definitely a mixed bag of signals out there.
Big time.
Like on the one hand, you've got the VIX being down, which suggests that even with this tariff news, investors aren't expecting any huge market upheavals in the near future. But then you have the 10-year yield falling, which usually means investors are moving towards those safe haven assets.
Which often happens when there's, a bit of uncertainty in the air.
Yeah, exactly. So there's this underlying sense of caution, even amidst the optimism around Bessent. It's like a tug of war between hope and fear.
So what are we supposed to make of all this? I mean, it's just a lot to process.
Yeah, no kidding. It's like trying to predict the weather in a hurricane. You know there's going to be some wild swings, but you're not exactly sure which way the wind's going to blow next.
So we've got this short-term market excitement with, new appointments and all that. But what about the bigger picture? Where are things headed, in the next few years?
That's where things get really interesting. We've got some pretty bold predictions floating around for the S&P 500. Goldman Sachs, they're saying it'll hit 6,200 by the end of this year.
This year.
Yeah, this year. And then you've got RBC and Barclays. They're predicting 6,600 by the end of 2025.
So basically, they're all saying the market's going to keep climbing.
Pretty much, yeah. They're banking on continued economic growth, easing inflation, and, maybe even some positive political moves from the new administration.
So are we headed for a boom? Should we all be, rushing to buy stocks right now?
Whoa. Hold your horses. Remember, these are just forecasts.
Right.
A lot can change in 3 years. A lot. I mean, what happens if, let's say, there's some unforeseen global event or inflation starts to creep back up?
Yeah, that's a good point. It's easy to get caught up in the hype, but it's important to remember that nothing is guaranteed.
Absolutely. And while we're thinking long term, let's not forget about what's happening right now with other global players. The FAD, for example, they might be cutting rates next month, right?
Right.
And then you've got the ECB. They're aiming for lower rates by 2025. And let's not forget that recent dip in global trade volume. All these things, they're connected. They're all part of this complex economic web.
It's a lot to keep track of. I mean, how are we supposed to make sense of all these moving parts? And more importantly, how do we actually use this information to make good financial decisions?
Well, I think it starts by zooming out a bit. Instead of getting bogged down in the day-to-day noise, try to focus on the bigger trends. Look for those underlying currents that are driving these market shifts.
So instead of just reacting to the headlines, we should be trying to understand the forces behind them.
Exactly. Because once you understand the why, the what starts to make a lot more sense. And that's what empowers you to make better decisions, whether you're investing, running a business, or just planning your own personal finances.
That's a great point. Okay, so we've talked about the big picture, but let's zoom back in on some of the individual players in this economic game. There were some pretty interesting moves from companies like Zoom, Amazon, and Walmart. Anything stand out to you?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Amazon, for one, they're really making a splash with their AI chip ambitions. They're developing their own in-house design, which is a direct challenge to NVIDIA.
Wow, so they're taking on the big dogs.
Yeah, they are. And this could have a huge impact on the future of AI and cloud computing. It's a bold move, and it'll be fascinating to see how it plays out.
It seems like Amazon is always pushing the envelope, always one step ahead.
Yeah.
But then you have Walmart, and they're facing some serious backlash for, well, rolling back some of their diversity programs. It's like they're caught between a rock and a hard place, trying to balance, profits and social responsibility.
It's a tricky situation for sure, and it really highlights the growing importance of corporate accountability.
Yeah, consumers are becoming more and more aware of where their money's going,
Huh?
and they want to support companies that align with their values.
Mm.
It's not just about the bottom line anymore.
Absolutely.
Oh, and speaking of bottom lines, Zoom, they actually posted an earnings beat, but their stock still went down.
Hmm.
It seems like investors are a little worried about, what happens to their growth now that the pandemic is, well, kind of over.
Yeah, they had an incredible run during those lockdown days, but now they've got to prove that they can adapt to this new post-pandemic world. It's a challenge a lot of companies are facing right now.
It's like that saying, what got you here won't get you there. Oh, and remember that story about Trump's watch company? It seems like even business moguls can have their fair share of flops. It's a good reminder that, success isn't always guaranteed, even for someone like Trump.
It's true, and it really underscores the importance of diversification. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Spread your bets, explore different opportunities, and always be prepared for the unexpected. Stuff happens.
That's great advice, and it kind of brings us back to this whole idea of navigating uncertainty. It feels like that's the underlying theme of everything we've talked about today. I mean, we've got global economic shifts, corporate shakeups, and a political landscape that, well, let's just say it's anything but predictable.
Yeah, it's a wild ride for sure. But what I find fascinating is how all these seemingly separate events are actually connected. They're all part of this intricate web of cause and effect.
It's like those butterfly effect diagrams, where one small change can have massive consequences down the line.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important to stay informed, to stay curious, and to keep asking questions. Don't just accept things at face value. Dig a little deeper, look for those connections, and try to understand the bigger picture.
So as we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with a question. What's your biggest takeaway from all of this? What's resonating with you the most?
Yeah, what are you thinking about right now? What are you worried about? What are you excited about? Because ultimately, it's not about us telling you what to think. It's about giving you the tools to think for yourself.
We've thrown a lot of information at you today. It's like, one of those giant jigsaw puzzles where you're not even sure what the final picture is supposed to be.
Right. But that's the fun part, isn't it? You get to sort through all those pieces, figure out how they fit together, and hopefully come up with something that makes sense to you.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to ask our listeners, what pieces are jumping out at you? What's catching your eye? What's making you go, I need to think about this some more?
Yeah. What are you most curious about? Or maybe even a little worried about? Because this is where the real learning begins, right? It's not just about absorbing information. It's about taking that information and doing something with it.
It's about turning knowledge into action. Figuring out, okay, so what does this mean for me? What do I need to do differently?
And remember, there's no one right answer. Everyone's situation is different. Everyone's goals are different. So what might be the right move for one person could be totally wrong for someone else.
That's why it's so important to, really think things through for yourself. Don't just blindly follow the crowd or take someone else's word for it. Do your own research, weigh the risks and rewards, and make decisions that make sense for you and your unique circumstances.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to ask questions. Lots of them. The more you learn, the better equipped you'll be to navigate this, let's be honest, pretty crazy world we're living in.
Absolutely. And who knows, maybe you'll even discover something that we missed, right? A new angle, a fresh perspective. That's what keeps things interesting.
That's the beauty of this whole process. There's always more to learn, always new connections to be made. So keep those minds open, stay curious, and never stop exploring.
That's what we're all about here on The Deep Dive. We're your guides, your fellow explorers, and we're here to help you make sense of this complex, ever-changing world. So until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay tuned.